Welcome back, everybody, to Two Guys and a Stack of Comics. Just one guy for today. Mike will be back this week. We'll be getting some good content about X-Men and a couple different topics that we're able to cover. But I had a topic I wanted to kind of address with a major announcement from Marvel Comic Books, and that's a new writer of Daredevil, Stephanie Phillips. Um, I did a video a couple weeks back, which I can link here. I talked about what's going on with Daredevil in terms of a particular poorly run that was from Saladin Ahmed, the Ultimate Universe Daredevil, which is a cosmic character with one of the worst character designs I've ever seen. Um, and then the fact that there's a gap, Daredevil's going to have at least 5 or 6 months with no book, even though there's a Punisher team up book that's in there with him. Um, Very weird to see Daredevil, one of the premier characters in all of Marvel Comics and all of comics, not have a comic book. Now, Daredevil's not Spider-Man, he's not Superman, he's not Batman, obviously. But he is one of the bigger name comic book characters who is one of probably only 10 to 15 characters where you would assume every single month he is going to have a solo title. It's been very few and far between that Daredevil has ever not had that. And typically, the lineage of Daredevil since Frank Miller took over the book has been you typically will get some of, if not the best writers in the business, to be the Daredevil main writer. The announcement that Stephanie Phillips is taking over is probably one of the more disheartening ones for Daredevil, in my opinion, in that this is nothing against Stephanie Phillips personally, but there is no resume that indicates that handling a character of the pedigree of Daredevil fits for her. She's had very, very few comic books that have been very successful. She had a sixth or seventh tier X-Men comic that only made it about 15 issues. And overall, I think what this larger conversation is, look, I'm going to give that run a chance. I hope she knocks it out of the park. I hope she does incredibly well. Do I think it's going to go great? Not so much. But there's a larger thing I think is happening in comic books that is weird that I think has hurt the comic book market quite a bit. And that's comic books used to seem to be a little more merit based on who got to write certain stories. And I think we've sort of lost that in that if you look back even for an artist, a classic, a legend like Neil Adams, Neil Adams starts out, he's on a lot of different titles, really small, comic books that are out there, war books and things like that. He didn't just come in and get Batman immediately, no matter how talented he was. And if you go back and look at his art, he was always one of the best. But he starts out, he's doing, backup stories. I think his elongated man story in Detective Comics. He did Dead Man for a while. He was on issues of the Spectre. He was on X-Men before that book, folded with Marvel. And it wasn't until he'd done years of covers and years of different stories with kind of C and D tier characters that he fully became the Batman artist. It was like he had earned his way to that job. You look at a lot of the same way that writers of, the modern age, Scott Snyder, right? Indie book like American Vampire blew up, did incredibly well with Vertigo. And obviously he had work before that, but his first main one was American Vampire with Vertigo. That does well. He got a run on Detective Comics where Dick Grayson was Batman, wrote the Black Mirror story, which, while I'm not a huge fan because Bruce Wayne isn't Batman, is regarded as one of the better Batman tales of the past 20 years. And as a result of that, that's why he got the new 52 Batman run. Right. So a really successful indie, a really successful kind of second tier book, even though Detective Comics, theoretically is a higher tier book. It's not the level of Batman. And then he got that role. Even Tom King, who I'm not a huge fan of, you look at the fact that he wrote several indie books like Sheriff Babylon, things like that. He was on the Omega Men, which was really well received. He did the Vision comic book, which was really, really well received. He was in Grayson that did really well. And then parlayed that success into getting the Batman title. There were 4 or 5 rather large successes, or at least well received books before he got that title. It feels like now we kind of just put whoever's available on the books. And I'm sure there's more thought that goes into it, but especially for something like Daredevil, which I have under no illusions that it's a top 5 or top 10 book in all of comic books, but it could be. And when you look at the fact that you've had, Frank Miller and Brian Michael Bendis and Ed Brubaker and Andy Diggle and Chip Zdarsky and Mark Waid who have done, really, and Nocenti, you go through, so many great creatives who have done on this character. Even Charles Soule, who, had written several successful series before getting Daredevil. The fact that we end up with a character, a writer whose last book was an X-Men book that got canceled after 15 issues. And you can say it was the original plan or anything like that. A successful book's going to keep running. And I wonder why we are where we are, where this is the moves that we're making. And that it's not like there isn't an available talent pool of writers who are out there. Um, you look at the fact that Brian Michael Bendis is coming back to Marvel. Now, you can say whatever you want about the end of Bendis's run at Marvel and the entirety of his run at DC. There is no one on the marketplace right now who has the resume that Brian Michael Bendis does in terms of producing successful comic books. In terms of Ultimate Spider-Man, Jessica Jones, the Alias series that he did, his Daredevil run, his Avengers run. You can even, his X-Men's run's not great, but it was a sales success that lasted a while. Guardians of the Galaxy, he gave them an extended long comic book. And again, quality may vary, but overall, he's got hundreds of issues that people loved. And look at the fact that he's coming back to Marvel and it's not as the Daredevil writer. Maybe he didn't want to do it, but he's out there. And it's one of those things where that's an easy win for Marvel. You have a huge writer with a good fan base, whether he's squandered that or not. And he's coming back to Marvel, and you don't put him on the most obvious choice that would have been out there. And instead, it's not even as though you put a writer who you could say, like, well, they've been getting success. Another writer that could have been great on this would have been someone like Jed MacKay, who, say what you will about his successes, right? Took a Black Cat series, did much better than most folks thought it would. Parlayed that into Moon Knight. Moon Knight's, at the very least, had a comic book for a very long time. I think it's a great run. And he's parlayed that into X-Men, right? And so he would seemingly be a good choice. And it's just a weird thing that we've arrived at, and that we seem to have writers now where there's nothing they've done that indicates that they should be given the titles that they have. In that, I look at the books that are really good right now on the market, and I look at what's the common theme of them, right? I think the best comic book going right now is Conan the Barbarian. You've probably heard me say that 100 times on this channel. One of the reasons why it's so good is Jim Zub's writing it, and the reason Jim Zub's writing is if you look at when Marvel had the character, the best well-received Conan stories were from Jim Zub. So he got that. You look at Absolute Batman, that book is selling incredibly well. Who's the writer on that? Scott Snyder, a guy with a proven track record of writing Batman comic books. I even look at something that's improving like Amazing Spider-Man with Joe Kelly, who had a history of writing Amazing Spider-Man. And you look at Jeremy Adams, right? Did some smaller books, got some great runs, got some things going. Now he's got Flash Gordon, now he's got Aquaman. And it's because he proved over and over again that he could do that. I just look at where we are with some of this. The fact that we are in the scenario we're in with comic books, it's not a lack of good creatives. It's that it just doesn't seem that Marvel or DC are interested in putting the creatives on some of these books. And, look, like I said, I wish Stephanie Phillips all the success in the world writing Daredevil. I hope I look back at this video 6 months from now and I'm like, man, how could I have doubted her? What an amazing run of Daredevil she's put together. But the track record doesn't indicate that that will happen. And I think it's the same thing, Solid and Ahmed for whoever his fans are. You look at his track record going into getting the Daredevil book and getting Wolverine. There wasn't much there that indicated that he would be able to craft together a successful story. And, even runs that haven't worked. And I look, Chip Zdarsky is another one where you can go, kind of earned the job, right? I mean, as much as Batman wasn't great, but if you look at what he had done before that, you had stuff like Howard the Duck, which was more successful than people thought it would. He did a Star-Lord run that was pretty well received. He did a couple smaller books that were well received. Parlayed all of that into Daredevil, did well on Daredevil, parlayed that to Batman. We just don't seem to do that. And that's where I think so many of these books don't seem to have much of a chance for success, in that they don't seem to be getting writers who have ever indicated that they could write a successful run on comic books. And certainly not ones who write the type of character they're taking over well. When you look at Daredevil as a character, there's so many guys out there who are writing great stories and doing things that fit that mold of a character. For instance, I can use the example of Dick Tracy, a comic book that has been far, far better than anybody would have thought it had been, with Alex Segura and Michael Meraki, I believe, on that book for Matt Cave. You want to talk about mystery writers, ability to write cool noir type stories? Imagine that being the new Daredevil writer. You look at someone like David Pepos, who has taken a Space Ghost comic book that from Dynamite that most likely wouldn't have been successful, and he's turned it into an absolute surefire hit that's on its third volume that continues to do well and is well received every month, especially for the publisher that it's coming from. You have writers out there writing some of these smaller titles who are successful and are currently writing characters that would fit the Daredevil mold. And again, Space Ghost Daredevil, maybe not the closest, but if you look at that book, Space Ghost is a very heroic but very stern, noble character, and those would have been something where you look at it. I just look at Stephanie Phillips and you wonder, how do we believe this is going to be successful? And it's something that seems to be unique to comic books now. In that, if you look at how things work, and Mike and I always make a lot of sports analogies on here, but if you look at sports, typically a coach is not hired off of losing from another team, right? If you take, let's just an easy identifiable one, right? Or the New England Patriots in football, right? Typically, if a coach is needed for one of those teams, they are going to find someone who has had a past track record of success. I'll use the Patriots as the example for right now. The New England Patriots had Bill Belichick for 24 years, most successful coach in history of the NFL. He was let go. They hired a new guy. New guy struggled. Patriots went to fired him and hired a new coach. They went and they found Mike Vrabel, who was the coach of the Tennessee Titans, who had won multiple division titles, had a track record of success, multiple playoff appearances, multiple playoff wins, despite having a roster that wasn't all that talented. When you bring him in as the coach, there's a track record that indicates that he's going to be successful, right? Typically, you look at the Chicago Bears this year. They're doing much better than expected. They went and they hired an offensive guy in Ben Johnson from the Lions, who was really, really successful, won a ton of games, had one of the best offenses. Bears wanted to get better at offense. They're better at offense, right? That's the sports world. That's how things work there typically. But in the work world, most of the time, people who get promoted, in most instances, are people who have shown at lower levels that they can succeed and they are trusted then with more responsibility. When I look at where we're at with comic books, it's a weird environment in that currently, and it seems to be a new trend, where you have writers who have no indication whatsoever that they're going to be successful on the books that they're on. And then Marvel and DC pretend to be stunned that those books got canceled. And what's so weird is there is so many good writers out there. It just seems like Marvel and DC are stuck in this kind of circular thing of recycling the same 8 to 9 writers that get these books canceled, and they kind of just think, well, like I can shift them a little bit and they'll go to a new book, and then it always ends up getting canceled. And so it's weird. I don't know. It's been the biggest observation I've seen in the last couple of years as a comic book fan is, what used to feel like a writer was building momentum and then they would take over a book. And you felt like, wow, there's all these good runs in the past you can read. The show will be good at this. We don't do that anymore. Now it kind of just seems like, hey, this person's available. And I think, sadly for a book like Daredevil, a book with an incredible legacy like that, it just seems like the book deserved better than this. But again, I hope I'm wrong. I'm rooting for Stephanie Phillips. I hope it's good. I'll buy the first issues. I've owned every issue of Daredevil. I really hope it's good. I hope 6 months from now I look like an idiot and it's like, man, she's writing the best Daredevil run that we've seen in years. I doubt it. I bet we'll probably be back here in a year talking about, hey, another new Daredevil #1 with a new writer. But hopefully I'm wrong. Let me know your guys' thoughts down below. Do you guys think that there's any chance this succeeds? And have you noticed that trend as well? That we don't seem to have writers who kind of earn their way into books anymore, where instead they are just sort of handed that book. I don't know. Seems to be the most troubling trend in comics to me. As always, folks, thank you for watching. God bless you. I hope you have a great day.